Randall Jones, 55 years old, 35 years on death row. Randall Jones and Chris Reish used a .30 caliber rifle to shoot targets on July 26, 1987, in the area of Rodman Dam in Putnam County. After midnight, they tried to find a fisherman to help them when Jones's car got stuck in the sand pits. The fisherman declined, but advised them to approach the driver of a Chevrolet pickup truck casually parked in the lot if they needed assistance. Matthew Brock and Kelly Perry slept in the truck's cab. A 12-year-old camper reported hearing 3 gunshots. The following morning, a concession worker at Rodman Dam discovered blood, shattered glass, and cigarette packs in the parking lot. Brock's body was located when she followed a trail of blood across a parking lot and into a forested area. Perry's partially dressed body was found after a police sweep of the area. Shots to the head caused the demise of both Brock and Perry. On July 27, 1987, at 7 a.m., Brock's brother Richard Brock and sister-in-law witnessed Brock's truck being driven by Jones at a convenience store in Green Cove Springs, Florida. They observed a rifle inside and bullet holes in the windshield. Jones asserted that Matthew Brock had sold the truck to him for $4,000 when Richard Brock questioned him about the car. Jones was detained on August 16, 1987, in Mississippi for having a stolen car. He confessed to the killings during a questioning with Putnam County Sheriff's deputies, but he accused Reish of carrying out the crimes. Chris Reish entered a guilty plea as part of a plea deal to 1 count each of armed robbery, armed burglary, accepting money to conceal a crime twice, and firing a deadly missile into an occupied vehicle. He received a total of 4 sentences, 2 terms of 20 years, 2 terms of 5 years, and 1 term of 15 years of community supervision. Daniel Burns, 78 years old, 35 years on death row. Following a traffic stop on August 18, 1987, Florida Highway Patrol Trooper Jeff Young was killed. Daniel Burns Jr. was found guilty and given the death penalty. Samuel Williams and Daniel Burns were traveling from Fort Myers back to Detroit when Florida Highway Patrol Trooper Jeff Young stopped them on I-75. Williams said that Trooper Young approached the car and requested identification. Returning to his police cruiser, Trooper Young radioed dispatch to do a wanted people search and to verify Burns' Michigan license plate registration. Burns agreed when Trooper Young next asked if he may search the car. Young and Burns fought after checking the trunk and discovering what seemed to be cocaine. Witnesses claimed that Burns took Trooper Young's revolver and pointed it at him while they were wrestling in a ditch filled with water. Burns fired 1 shot that struck Trooper Young in the head and his wedding ring as he threw his hands in front of his face. By the time more troopers arrived at the scene, Young had already passed away. According to the testimony of the medical examiners, the shot was fired at such a close range that gunpowder was left on Trooper Young's face. Burns escaped on foot and was found later that evening. Williams claimed that Burns was traveling to Florida on multiple occasions to buy $10,000 worth of cocaine. Samuel Derrick, 56 years old, 35 years on death row. Harry Lee, a bystander, discovered Rema Sharma's body on a walkway in the woods next to Sharma's convenience store in Pasco County on June 25, 1987, at 6:30 a.m. The body left a trail of blood that extended 20 feet away to a blood puddle. The body was discovered with a piece of t-shirt and 2 pairs of tennis shoe prints, one of which belonged to Lee. According to the evidence, Sharma was stabbed 31 times and he passed away between 10 and 15 minutes after the last wound. David Lowry, a friend of Samuel Derrick who testified at the trial that Derrick informed him he killed Sharma, implicated Derrick in the crime. Derrick admitted to the killing after being apprehended, saying that he jumped Sharma as he was leaving the shop with the intention of robbing it. Derrick grabbed Sharma as he turned to get back to the shop. When the victim screamed and recognized Derrick, the latter admitted stabbing Sharma to shut him up. Derrick removed the bloody piece of his shirt and removed $360 from Sharma's pocket. The knife was thrown away in the forest, and Derrick dumped some clothes and shoes in a pond. Frank Walls, 56 years old, 31 years on death row. Frank Walls allegedly admitted to breaking into Edward Alger and Ann Peterson's mobile home early on July 22, 1987, with the intent to commit a burglary. While entering the home, Walls deliberately knocked over a fan, waking both Alger and Peterson. When the two arrived to check the noise, Walls ordered Alger to lay down while Peterson bound his ankles, tied his hands behind his back, and gagged him. He then instructed Peterson to lie down so he could shackle her in a similar way. Alger attacked Walls when he was able to break free of his bonds. Walls slit Alger's throat with a knife he had brought along while he was fumbling. Walls dropped his knife after Alger bit his leg. Then Walls fired 3 times into Alger's head. Walls went back to where Peterson was bound and discovered her sobbing and attempting to communicate while wearing the gag. He unfastened her and took the gag out of her mouth. Peterson and Walls fought after learning that Alger had died, and he tore off her clothing in the process. Then Walls fired a shot at Peterson's back of the head. Peterson continued to scream after surviving the initial shooting. She was pushed into a pillow by Walls, who then shot her again. Later that day, when Alger didn't show up for work, the bodies were found. On the basis of evidence given by Walls's former roommate who lived close to the victims, investigators were able to secure a warrant to investigate his mobile home. Walls was apprehended after investigators found evidence at his home connecting him to the murders. Perry Taylor, 57 years old, 34 years on death row. Taylor was found guilty of killing Geraldine Birch and given the death penalty. Taylor acknowledged that he had killed her. He claimed that Birch joined the group of friends he was with when they were standing together. Taylor alleged that after the group split up, Birch called him as he was walking away to let him know that she was attempting to reach Sulphur Springs. Taylor claimed that he didn't own a car. Birch now demanded cash or crack cocaine in exchange for relations. They arrived at a Little League field dugout after agreeing on $10. Taylor claimed that Birch bit him and he had to choke her and punch her to get her to release his grip. Taylor also acknowledged hitting Birch more forcefully out of frustration. Birch, according to the medical examiner's testimony, had at least 10 significant strikes to her body, most of which had caused internal organ damage, including to her brain, throat, heart, lungs, spleen, and ribs. In addition, Birch had injuries on her face, chest, and stomach, as well as bald spots and a bite mark on her arm. Taylor did not have the expected wounds to correlate with his story. George Hudg, 66 years old, 34 years on death row. Hudg was detained in November 1986 on suspicion of indecent exposure as a result of a complaint made by Betty Ricks, a 20-year-old convenience store employee. On January 8, 1987, at 6 a.m., Ricks was discovered laying next to her car in the parking lot of the store. Due to the Ricks report, Hudg's criminal diversion program arbitration hearing was set for the same day her death was discovered. Ricks was shot twice, and the following day she passed away without waking up. Hudg was on the maintenance team at the department store, which was across the street from the convenience shop. On the day of the shooting, a co-worker told police she observed Hudg's truck at the convenience store at 5:40 a.m., but Hudg said he was at home sleeping because he was not required to be at work that day. At first, his wife and son, Jesse Watson, helped him maintain his alibi. Hudg was detained for the murder in February 1989 when his identity emerged as the main suspect in the inquiry. Tony Watts, 57 years old, 34 years on death row. On the morning of February 18, 1988, Glenda Jurado was returning home after going for a jog when Tony Watts dragged her with a gun. Watts told Glenda he had just been released from jail and needed money to go out of town. When Glenda's husband, Simon Jurado, opened the door, she informed him that Watts was holding a gun and demanded money. Watts sought more money after Simon gave him all he had, threatening to kill Glenda if he didn't get it all. Simon presented Watts with a piggy bank filled with cash in response to his threats. Following a thorough check of the home, Watts ordered Glenda and Simon to undress in the bathroom. Then Watts assaulted Glenda. Simon roared and threw a chair at Watts when he saw what the man was doing to his wife. Watts was thrown into the corridor by the chair. While the two men fought, Glenda fled the house. Glenda heard her husband screaming and a gunshot. She also saw Watts leave the house carrying a rifle and flee down the street. Simon fled the house as well, but passed away after collapsing on the grass. The gunshot wound to Simon's mouth, which severed an artery going to his brain, was the cause of his death. Glenda and the neighbor who saw Watts fleeing the house that day in September 1988 recognized him as the attacker. The Jurados discovered Watts's baseball cap inside their home, and it had microscopically identical hairs to his. His prints were also visible on the front porch door. Jeffrey Atwater, 60 years old, 33 years on death row. On August 11, 1989, Jeffrey Atwater was found guilty of killing Ken Smith and given a death sentence. Atwater made an effort to enter the John Knox apartment complex in St. Petersburg, Florida, on the day of the murder. He lied to the security guard by claiming to be Smith's grandson and fabricating the reason for his visit. He went to visit Smith's room after entering his flat. Atwater left the apartment after 20 minutes, and Smith's body was found the following day. Smith's pockets were turned inside out and all of his money was gone, suggesting that he had also been robbed. Atwater allegedly told multiple others that he killed Smith after the slaying, and he was subsequently detained later that day. There was proof that Atwater searched for Smith for up to 3 days before killing him. Smith had reportedly previously given Atwater money, but because of his dread of him, Smith had pledged never to do so again. A medical examiner testified at the trial that 64-year-old Smith had suffered over 40 knife wounds, and there was evidence that he had also been beaten either before or during the murder. Mark Geralds, 56 years old, 33 years on death row. Tressa and Kevin Pettibone's 80-year-old son discovered his mother's body on the kitchen floor on February 1, 1989, after she had been battered and stabbed. Tressa Pettibone suffered 2 deadly stabbings on the left side of her neck and 2 on the right side. These stab wounds matched the weapon that was discovered in the kitchen sink. The victim's head, face, chest, and belly all had bruises and abrasions that were the result of physical trauma, according to the medical examiner. The victim's wrists had been tied with a plastic tie for at least 20 minutes before she passed away. Her car was among the many things from the house that had vanished. Prior to the murder, Geralds, a carpenter, assisted in remodeling the Pettibones' house. Circumstantial evidence linked Geralds to the crime. He pawned jewelry from the Pettibone home that had blood traces that were consistent with Tressa Pettibone's blood type, but inconsistent with Gerald's blood type. He gave the victim's sunglasses to a friend. His shoes were found to be matching the victim's shoes, and Geralds knew that Kevin Pettibone was out of town at the time of the crime. Constantine Photopulos, 64 years old, 33 years on death row. Photopulos started an extramarital relationship with Dieter Hunt, a bartender who worked at his establishment, in the summer of 1989. On October 20th, Photopulos and Hunt convinced Kevin Ramsey that he was going to be admitted into a club in order to coax him to a remote shooting range. To stop Ramsey from extorting money from him over his involvement in counterfeiting, Photopulos planned to assassinate him. If Hunt didn't kill Ramsey, Photopulos threatened to kill her. Hunt shot Ramsey with a .22 handgun 3 times in the chest and once in the head, while Photopulos recorded the incident. Ramsey was bound to a tree. Photopulos put an end to the video recording and used an AK-47 assault rifle to kill Ramsey. In order to obtain the $700,000 in insurance proceeds, Photopulos then planned to murder his wife, Lisa. To enlist Hunt's assistance in killing Lisa, Photopulos utilized the videotape of Hunt killing Ramsey. He gave Hunt the order to hire a hitman to murder Lisa. Hunt made 2 attempts to employ a man, but the idea never materialized. Lisa Henderson, a friend of Hunt's, introduced him to Tasia James, her lover, who had been paid $5,000 to assassinate Lisa Photopulos. Brian Chase was hired to murder Lisa after James' first 2 attempts failed. On November 4, 1989, Chase visited the Photopulos residence after making multiple fruitless attempts. He shot Lisa once in the head, but she survived the wound. Chase was then repeatedly shot by Photopulos in an effort to make the murder attempt look like a botched burglary. Police discovered the Ramsey murder videotape, a .22 caliber pistol, and an AK-47 assault weapon when searching the residence. Ronald Clark, 55 years old, 32 years on death row. Ronald Willis was killed on January 12, 1990, and Ronald Clark was found guilty and given the death penalty. John Hatch, a co-defendant, testified during the trial that he and Ronald Clark were traveling to Jacksonville on January 12, 1990. The two men were waiting for a ride while shooting at various targets along the highway with Clark's pistol that he had been refurbishing. When Ronald Willis spotted the two men, he pulled over and offered to give them a ride. Clark informed Hatch in a hushed voice that he intended to take the truck once he was inside. When Willis got out of the truck after Clark had told him to stop, Clark shot him 7 or 8 times. After shoving Willis's body into the middle seat, Clark started his car and headed for a more distant area. Willis's money and boots were stolen by Clark, who then abandoned the body in a ditch. After dinner, Clark and Hatch visited an ex-girlfriend as they carried out the rest of their plans for the evening. The two men came back later to get Willis's body. They brought the body to Nassau County Sound Bridge, where it was weighed before being thrown into the water. Willis's ex-wife didn't start driving around looking for him until she started to worry about his unexpected departure. Clark and Hatch continued to use Willis's stolen truck. When his ex-wife saw his pickup at the hotel, she recognized Clark and Hatch as the drivers. Police were called by Willis's ex-wife, but Clark and Hatch escaped before they arrived. Hatch and Clark escaped to South Carolina. On February 7, 1990, Hatch traveled back to Nassau County, where he was detained while Clark was captured in South Carolina. Michael Griffin, 57 years old, 32 years on death row. On April 27, 1993, Michael Griffin, Samuel Velez, and Nicolas Tarallo made the decision to break into a house. Griffin's father's Cadillac took them from Tarallo's apartment to a Chrysler LeBaron, where they changed cars. The LeBaron, which had been used in earlier break-ins, had been stolen by Griffin before. After looking for a suitable target, the three ended up at a Holiday Inn in Newport, Florida, where Griffin had carried out previous successful burglaries. Griffin and Velez broke into a hotel room and took a pocketbook and a cell phone. Griffin and Velez split up the stolen goods while Tarallo drove. The three saw a police cruiser as they were leaving the Holiday Inn. Griffin cried out in fear and instructed Tarallo to flee the police car. Officers Martin and Crespo were operating a different police vehicle when they saw the LeBaron and started to follow it. Griffin refused to return to jail and told Tarallo to keep avoiding the police, despite his attempts to pull over. When Tarallo eventually pulled over, Griffin started firing at the police, killing Officer Martin, and the three tried to flee. Officer Crespo accepted the surrender of Tarallo and Velez, but Griffin left in the LeBaron and was subsequently caught. David Pittman, 62 years old, 32 years on death row. For the murders of Clarence, Barbara, and Bonnie Knowles, David Pittman was found guilty and given the death penalty. Marie Knowles, a daughter of Clarence and Barbara Knowles, married Pittman. Pittman did not desire the divorce that Marie sought to pursue. Pittman had vowed to hurt Marie and her family during the divorce. On May 15, 1990, early in the morning, witnesses called the fire department to report that Marie's parents, Clarence and Barbara Knowles' house was on fire. Following an investigation, it was determined that the offender had disconnected the phone link before starting the fire and stealing Bonnie Knowles' car afterward. Clarence, Barbara, and Bonnie's bodies were discovered inside the house. All three of the victims were said to have died as a consequence of several stab wounds that caused heavy bleeding. Bonnie Knowles' throat had also been cut. Another witness stated that he spotted a car that looked like Bonnie Knowles on the same morning of May 15, 1990, in a ditch by the side of the road close to the Knowles' house. The witness noticed a truck come up next to the car, and it was discovered that it belonged to Pittman. Later, the witness saw the burning car. Pittman was then recognized in a photo lineup by another witness who observed the man fleeing from the flaming car. Pittman confessed to the previously mentioned offenses, according to a jailhouse informant's testimony. Rodney Low, 53 years old, 32 years on death row. Donna Burnell, the victim, was a clerk at an Indian River County New-Pack convenience store. She was shot 3 times with a .32 caliber handgun on the morning of July 3, 1990, by a man who had just walked into the store. Miss Burnell was shot in the face, head, and chest, and when she was being transported to the hospital, she passed away. Without collecting any cash from the shop, the man fled the scene. Because Rodney Low's fingerprints were discovered at the scene and his car was observed leaving the convenience store's parking lot, the police were able to connect him to the incident. The following week, they brought him in for interrogation. Law made a statement that connected him to the murder after having a brief talk with his girlfriend. He was detained after making this admission. Stephen Stein, 55 years old, 32 years on death row. The murders of Dennis Saunders and Bobby Hood led to the conviction of Stephen Stein. Dennis Saunders and Bobby Hood, shift supervisor at the Pizza Hut on Edgewood Avenue, were shot and killed there on January 20, 1991. Hood was shot 5 times while Saunders was shot 4 times. Additionally, $980 was taken from the diner. The following day, Saunders and Hood's bodies were discovered in the Pizza Hut's men's restroom. A little after 11 p.m., an employee named Ronald Burroughs had left the establishment. He claimed that when he departed, there were still 2 clients inside. The co-defendant, Mark Christmas, and Stephen Stein were the customers, according to Burroughs. Stein worked for Pizza Hut and Christmas had previously worked there. Christmas' fingerprint was also discovered by the police on the unpaid guest check. Stein and Christmas's roommate Kelly White testified that the two had discussed planning a robbery at a Pizza Hut. Stein and Christmas claimed they were going to see Christmas' father about selling the weapon when they left the apartment on January 20, 1991 at around 9:30 p.m. However, Christmas's father stated that neither Stein nor Christmas had visited him that evening. By 11:45 p.m., Stein and Christmas had returned home. Stein provided a statement to the police after being detained. He declared his want to discuss the crime and waived his rights. He acknowledged participating in the crime and claimed that things had gone bad. He never acknowledged shooting Hood or Saunders. Emanuel Johnson, 60 years old, 32 years on death row. On October 4, 1988, the body of Iris White, 73 years old, was found by the police. The victim was discovered naked below the waist. She had received 24 stab wounds and the back of her head had sustained brutal damage. Defense-related injuries were evident on White's physique. Police found a cut-open screen and an open living room window at the crime site. On the windowsill, Emanuel Johnson's fingerprints were discovered. There were also 2 hairs found at the scene. Under a microscope, these hairs exhibited the same traits as Johnson's, but a specialist testified that a perfect match could not be made. Johnson had been employed by White to work on her yard several years prior to the murder. A questioning of Johnson took place on October 12, 1988. The cops were able to record a confession during this conversation. Johnson admitted that he visited White's home to talk about lawn care in this confession. Johnson grabbed White as soon as she opened the door and choked her till she passed out. He then repeatedly stabbed White. He locked himself out of the house and fled through the front door. Once he was locked out, he realized he had forgotten to take White's wallet. He cut the screen and slipped inside the house through the living room window after about 20 minutes. Johnson claimed to have thrown away the wallet at a specific location. The wallet was discovered by a road surveyor in the same spot where Johnson claimed to have left it. Billy Kearse, 51 years old, 32 years on death row. Billy Leon Kearse was found guilty of murdering Fort Pierce police officer Danny Parrish on January 18, 1991, as well as armed robbery. Kearse was found to be traveling the wrong way down a one-way street by Officer Danny Parrish. Parrish stopped Kearse after radioing the car's license plate number. Kearse supplied Parrish a number of aliases that did not correspond to the history on his driver's license because he did not have his own. Then Kearse was told to get out of the car and put his hands on the roof. A fight started when Parrish tried to handcuff Kearse. Kearse fired 14 shots after snatching Parrish's gun. Parrish was hit by 13 bullets, 9 of which entered his body and 4 of which entered his bulletproof vest. A neighboring cab driver heard the gunfire and witnessed a dark blue car driven away from the site by a black man and woman. The cab driver then used Parrish's radio to make a help request. Emergency services took Parrish to the hospital, where he succumbed to his gunshot wounds. A 1979 dark blue Monte Carlo driven by a black male was the subject of a Be on the Lookout alert. When the police looked up the license plate number Parrish had requested prior to the traffic stop, They found that it was registered to a Fort Pierce home, which is where Kearse was taken into custody. Kearse gave up his right to a Miranda warning and admitted to shooting Parrish while they were arguing. During the trial, a friend of Kearse's stated in testimony that he shot Officer Parrish because his probation was suspended and the police was looking for him already. Anthony Mangen, 57 years old, 30 years on death row. Anthony Mangen was found guilty of first-degree murder and given the death penalty on January 28, 1993. Betty Jean Woods, a clerk at a convenience store in Jacksonville, was shot in the head on September 16, 1990, and she passed away 4 days later. Since there were no witnesses to the shooting, a customer who entered the convenience shop immediately after the shooting remembered seeing a man running out of the business with a paper bag. The injured employee was found by the customer, who later recognized Mangen as the man leaving the business. A store manager noticed a $59 difference from the register after the incident. A .25 caliber semi-automatic pistol, bullets, and Mangen's Georgia driver's license were discovered during a police search of his home on September 18, 1990, leading to his arrest in Kingsland, Georgia. The bullet recovered from Woods was examined, and it was established that it had been shot from the .25 caliber weapon found at Mangen's house. Chadwick Willy, 56 years old, 32 years on death row. Marlis Sather came home from work on her lunch break on the afternoon of September 5, 1990, only to find Chadwick Willy breaking into her house. When Sather entered the house, Willy hit her many times in the head with a blunt weapon hard enough to fracture and displace a portion of her skull. Willy used wire and duct tape to bind her hands and ankles. Then, in an effort to strangle her, he tied a telephone cord tightly around her neck. Willy drenched Sather in gasoline and lit her ablaze after this failed to work. According to the medical examiner's reports, Sather's death was caused by smoke inhalation. After receiving a call from her work informing the family that Sather had to return from her lunch break, Sather's son-in-law went over to the house and found her body. Antonio Melton, 51 years old, 31 years on death row. On January 23, 1991, Antonio LeBaron Melton and his pal Pendleton Lewis entered Georgia Carter's pawn shop in Pensacola. He pretended to be interested in pawning a jewelry, claims Lewis, who was given immunity by the state to testify against Melton. Melton claimed that Carter and Lewis were discussing the necklace when he put on surgical gloves and reached for a ring. When Carter noticed this, he reached for one of his guns. Melton drew his own revolver while Lewis grabbed Carter's hands. Carter's gun was subsequently taken by Melton. According to Melton, Carter rushed him before falling and hitting his head. Melton then ordered Carter to stop moving, but Carter grabbed for the gun in Melton's hand. Carter was fatally shot in the head during the two's fight for the weapon. The one undeniable truth that remains despite the different accounts is that Melton was the one who fired the shot that eventually killed Carter. Ernest SGS, 68 years old, 31 years on death row. SGS was found guilty of murdering Pauline Casey and given the death penalty. Pauline Casey was employed at Walton County's Teddy Bear Bar. The bar was discovered to be unlocked and to be missing money on August 6, 1990. In addition, Casey's car, handbag, and keys were discovered at the establishment, but the victim was not there. Casey's neighbor, Ray Hamilton, told the police that as he left, Casey and the client he didn't identify were playing pool. Police were alerted to the situation and searched for the man and his car that fit Hamilton's description. Based on the description of the vehicle, Ernest SGS was stopped. SGS gave officers permission to search his house and car. They discovered $170 in little banknotes, Casey's hand and fingerprints on SGS' shirt, and blood that matched the victim's blood in his car. The cops also discovered a bar key and a beer cup that resembled those from the Teddy Bear Bar in the harbor behind SGS' house. The authorities identified SGS' tire track from his car with those discovered on a nearby dirt road. Police searched this area, and not far from the road where the tire tracks were discovered, they also discovered Casey's body. She had 2 stab wounds to the neck and 1 to the back. SGS claimed that he had been set up to commit Casey's murder. Ronnie Johnson, 56 years old, 32 years on death row. Around 9 p.m. on March 11, 1989, Tequila Larkins, the business owner of the Sparkle City Laundromat in Perrine, Florida, closed the establishment's entrance. Along with Miss Larkins, customers Jerry Briggs, Valerie Briggs, Eric Beetle, and Walter Hills remained inside the laundromat. Soon after, Ronnie Johnson knocked on the door and requested a change. Johnson barged in as Miss Larkins opened the door, argued with Miss Larkins, and then started fighting with her physically. Johnson took a gun and shot Miss Larkins after dealing her multiple punches to the face. On April 2, 1989, Johnson admitted to the crime, but he later tried to have the confession suppressed. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.